Kiara sat on a weathered curb, his fingers wrapped tightly around a half-empty water bottle he had scavenged from a nearby recycling bin. The sun bore down relentlessly, making the pavement beneath his feet so hot he could feel it through his worn-out sneakers. He had grown accustomed to the heat, the hunger, and the stares of passers-by who avoided him as though his misfortune were contagious. He had a quiet strength about him, a will to survive, born out of years of hardship. Kiara wasn't like other teenagers his age. At just 4 years old, his life had taken a horrifying turn. He had been ripped away from his parents in a chilling act of human trafficking, his childhood innocence stolen in an instant. Though he had been rescued by anti-trafficking officers a year later, the trauma left behind was a shadow that followed him everywhere. After a brief stay in a shelter, he had been thrust into a system that didn't know how to handle someone like him. By the time he was 10, he had slipped through the cracks and ended up on the streets. Yet, even in the face of relentless adversity, Kiara clung to his humanity. He had learned to navigate the bustling city, scavenging for food in trash bins, accepting handouts when they came, and doing his best to avoid trouble. But he wasn't just a survivor. He was compassionate too. He often shared what little he had with others who were just as desperate. Today, however, Kiara was tired. His nights of restless sleep on a thin blanket under an overpass had caught up to him. He took small sips of water, rationing it carefully as he watched the world rush past him. Cars zoomed down the street, their drivers oblivious to his existence. He wondered what it might be like to sit in one of those air-conditioned vehicles, to feel safe for once. His thoughts were interrupted by the deafening roar of an engine. Startled, he looked up just in time to see a sleek black SUV swerving wildly through traffic. The driver was clearly out of control. The vehicle skidded across lanes, narrowly missing other cars before veering off the road and slamming into a utility pole with a sickening crash. Kiara froze for a moment. The world seemed to hold its breath. Then the pole began to teeter, sparks flying as the power lines snapped. Flames erupted from the SUV's hood, spreading quickly. A small crowd began to gather, but no one moved closer. "They're just going to stand there," Kiara muttered to himself, his heart pounding. He glanced around, hoping someone, anyone, would step in, but the onlookers remained rooted to the spot, their faces a mix of fear and indecision. Kiara's hands clenched into fists. If he didn't act, the person inside that car was going to die. He didn't have time to think about his own safety. Kiara sprinted toward the wreckage, his heart hammering in his chest. The heat from the flames was intense, singing his skin as he approached. The acrid smell of burning oil filled his nostrils, making his eyes water. Peering through the shattered driver's side window, he saw a man slumped over the steering wheel. Smoke filled the interior, making it nearly impossible to see. "Hey!" he shouted, banging on the door. "Wake up!" The man didn't respond. Kiara's mind raced. The fire was spreading, and the car could explode at any moment. He tried the door handle, but it was jammed. Gritting his teeth, he reached through the broken window, ignoring the shards of glass that cut into his arms. His fingers fumbled with the seatbelt, finally managing to unbuckle it. With a deep breath, he gripped the man under his arms and began to pull. He was heavy, far heavier than Kiara had anticipated, and his thin frame strained under the effort. "Come on," he muttered, his muscles screaming in protest. The man's legs caught on the edge of the doorframe, and for a moment, Kiara thought he wouldn't be able to get him out. But with a final desperate tug, he freed him and dragged him a few feet away from the burning vehicle. Kiara collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. His lungs burned, and his vision blurred from the smoke. He barely had time to catch his breath before the SUV exploded in a fiery burst. The force of the blast knocked him backward, and he instinctively threw himself over the man's unconscious body to shield him from the flying debris. When the dust settled, Kiara pushed himself up on shaky arms. His ears were ringing, and his hands were scraped and bleeding, but he was alive. He turned his attention to the man, who was beginning to stir. His eyes fluttered open, and he groaned softly. "Hey," Kiara said, his voice hoarse. "You're okay. You're safe now." The man blinked, his gaze unfocused. What happened?" "You crashed," Kiara explained. "Your car caught fire. I pulled you out." He stared at Kiara, the realization of what had just happened dawning in his eyes. You saved me, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. Kiara shrugged, his exhaustion catching up to him. It's no big deal. No big deal, the man repeated, sitting up slowly. You risked your life for me. I don't even know your name. He hesitated. Kiara. Kiara, the man said, as if committing it to memory. I'm Malik, and thank you. You saved my life. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Kiara looked away, uncomfortable with the attention. You don't have to. Just be careful next time. Okay? But as Malik's gaze shifted to the small gold bracelet around Kiara's wrist, his expression changed. His eyes widened, and his breath caught in his throat. That bracelet, he whispered. Kiara instinctively touched the bracelet, his fingers curling around it protectively. What about it? Malik didn't respond right away, his mind racing as memories flooded back. Could it really be? Could this boy, this homeless teenager who had just saved his life, be the son he had lost over a decade ago? As the weight of the moment settled over him, Malik's heart began to race. He needed answers, and he had a feeling this was only the beginning of an extraordinary journey. As Malik sat up, his body aching from the crash, his eyes couldn't leave the small gold bracelet on Kiara's wrist. The charm on it had a single word etched into it, Amari. It was a name that had haunted him for over a decade, a name he had whispered in his prayers every night. He felt his breath catch in his throat as emotions he had long buried threatened to overwhelm him. Your bracelet, Malik said softly, his voice trembling. Where did you get it? Kiara blinked at him, his brow furrowing in confusion. He instinctively touched the charm, his fingers brushing against its smooth surface. I've had it for as long as I can remember, he said cautiously. It's the only thing I have from before. Malik swallowed hard, his mind racing back to the last time he had seen that bracelet. It had been a gift for his son on his 3rd birthday, a delicate token of his love. He could still remember the way Amari's small hands had clutched it excitedly, the way he had smiled up at him with wide, innocent eyes. Before, Malik echoed, trying to steady his voice. What do you mean? Kiara hesitated, glancing at the ground. He wasn't used to talking about his past. It was too painful, too messy. But something about Malik's expression, the urgency in his voice, made him feel like he could trust him. I don't remember much, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I was really young, maybe 4 or 5. All I know is that I was taken away from my parents. I think it was human traffickers. The police rescued me, but I never saw my mom or dad again. His words hit Malik like a punch to the gut. He felt the world tilt around him, his vision blurring with unshed tears. Human traffickers, he repeated, his voice breaking. Oh God. Kiara glanced at him, startled by the intensity of his reaction. Why are you so upset? He asked cautiously. Malik took a shaky breath, his hands trembling as he reached out toward Kiara, but stopped himself. He didn't want to frighten him, but he needed him to understand. Kiara, he said slowly, his voice thick with emotion. Is your name really Kiara, or is it just something you've been called because of the bracelet? He frowned, confused by the question. It's the only name I've ever had. The people at the shelter said it was probably my real name because of the bracelet. Malik nodded, his chest tightening. And you don't remember anything else? Your parents? Your home? Kiara shook his head. Not really. Just bits and pieces. I remember a woman's face sometimes when I close my eyes. She had warm brown eyes and a soft voice. I think she used to sing to me. Malik's breath hitched. That was your mother, he whispered, his voice trembling. Kiara's eyes widened. What? How do you? Because I'm your father, Malik blurted out, tears streaming down his face. I've been looking for you for 11 years, Amari. It's me. It's your dad.